A man is behind bars in Ohio in connection to a double homicide in rural Sycamore that took place 3.5 years ago.
It's been a horrific event for them to go through, but they've been very patient and given nothing but support to us.
Police did a great job, and everybody involved, and I think that should be a source of satisfaction or pride, that they were able to get this guy.
It was supposed to be a time of warmth, family, and quiet joy in the small town of Sycamore, Illinois. Instead, at a modest farmhouse off Old State Road, blood was splattered across floors, and 2 lifeless bodies lay hidden from view. Patricia Wilson, 85, and her devoted son, Robert, 64. No forced entry, no witnesses, no screams heard across the farmlands. Only silence. Their car sat abandoned miles away near Chicago's Lincoln Park Zoo, the only sign that something horrific had happened inside their home. For years, the killer remained a ghost. Thousands of leads led nowhere. DNA samples collected, but no name to match. A town that had barely known violent crime was now gripped by fear. Because if Patricia and Robert could be taken, who was truly safe? And when the shocking truth finally emerged, it was worse than anyone could have imagined. A stranger, a random encounter, a life forever shattered. This is the haunting case of Patricia and Robert Wilson, and the predator who turned a peaceful farmhouse into a scene of unimaginable horror. Patricia Wilson had lived through eras most could only read about. Born during the Great Depression, shaped by the wars and hardships of the 20th century. By 85, she had built a life defined by quiet resilience. A woman known for her simple joys. Church on Sundays, tending to her farmhouse, handing out $1 bills to children at St. John's Lutheran Church, always wearing a warm smile. She lived humbly in a modest home on Old State Road in Sycamore, Illinois, surrounded by wide farmland and neighbors who knew each other by name. For decades, she stayed rooted in the same house, never needing more than her family, her faith, and her small community. To those who knew her, Patricia wasn't just an elderly woman. She was a cornerstone, a constant in a world that never stopped changing. Her son, Robert Wilson, lived with her. At 64, Robert was described as cheerful, charitable, and well-loved around town, often seen at the Sycamore Moose Lodge, always ready to lend a helping hand. Nicknamed Smiley for good reason, he embodied the same generosity his mother had quietly nurtured in him. On August 14th, 2016, Patricia and Robert spent their Sunday morning, as they often did, at church. They shared breakfast afterward with friends, exchanging laughter and stories without a single hint of what was coming. Later that day, Patricia called her sister. A simple conversation about laundry, about mowing the lawn, about everyday life. It would be the last time anyone heard her voice. As the sun set and the quiet of rural Sycamore took over, the Wilsons' home, usually a symbol of comfort and routine, was about to become a place of terror. Jonathan Hurst didn't belong to the quiet rhythms of Sycamore, Illinois. He was a man from the city, a former Chicago bartender with no known ties to the Wilson family. Yet, on that August day in 2016, something led him down Old State Road, toward the isolated farmhouse that Patricia and Robert Wilson called home for nearly half a century. Hurst's past was already shadowed by signs of instability. Though not a career criminal, he had brushes with law enforcement. Those who knew him once described him as gentle and nonviolent, but the evidence would later suggest otherwise. What lurked beneath that surface was something far more dangerous, a man capable of unspeakable violence. Cell tower data would later show Hurst's movements across Illinois. On August 12, 2016, he stayed at a hotel in Elmhurst, a fact confirmed by business records. But by August 14th, the timeline grew more sinister. His phone pinged near Sycamore just after 4 a.m., aligning almost perfectly with the window of time when Patricia and Robert's world would unravel. The Great Western Trail, A path cutting through fields and open land provided him easy, unseen access. Investigators believe Hearst wandered off the trail and onto Route 64, where the Wilson home sat just beyond sight of the main road. Alone, vulnerable, and utterly unsuspecting, the Wilsons had no idea a stranger had come into their orbit. Later testimony painted a chilling picture. Hearst allegedly entered the house without permission, slipping unnoticed into a crawl space near the laundry room. There, surrounded by Diet Coke cans, knives, and a pillow, he waited, hidden within the very walls of their home. A man they didn't know, a danger they couldn't see, a predator already inside. The hours between Patricia Wilson's cheerful church outing and her brutal murder were a horrifying descent into violence. Investigators believe that after Patricia's final phone call with her sister around 7:43 p.m., she unknowingly stepped into a trap already set inside her own home. Jonathan Hearst, hiding in the laundry room crawl space with knives and supplies, was waiting. What happened next can only be pieced together from blood patterns, crime scene photographs, and forensic evidence. Patricia likely entered the laundry room carrying a basket, moving through the same doorway she had walked through thousands of times. She was ambushed, startled by the hidden intruder. In the chaos that followed, Hearst attacked her with brutal force, beating her until her face was unrecognizable. He strangled her with a piece of cloth, slicing her hand in the struggle. Robert Wilson, returning home later that evening, likely walked into the horror without warning. Police believe he was assaulted almost immediately. He fought hard. Defensive wounds were found. But he was overwhelmed, beaten severely, stabbed 4 times, dragged downstairs, and left sprawled near the basement, as if discarded. The crime scene suggested more than just panic. There were signs of a clumsy, failed attempt to clean. Blood smeared across hardwood floors. A Windex bottle misplaced near bloody footprints. A staged body in a bed upstairs. An eerie attempt to delay discovery. The sheer savagery of the attack left seasoned detectives shaken. The alarm was first raised when Patricia and Robert failed to answer their phones the following day. Concerned, Patricia's daughter and son-in-law drove to the Wilson home, tucked away near the farmlands of Old State Road. What they found shattered their world. The foyer and sunroom showed blood smeared along the hardwood floors. Trails led toward the basement, where the brutal reality awaited. Patricia's battered body lay face down, half inside the crawl space near the laundry room, close to where Hearst had hidden. Robert's body was sprawled near the basement stairs, bloodied and bruised. The DeKalb County Major Case Squad was immediately activated. Former Detective Kelly Sullivan and nearly 24 officers arrived at the scene, working tirelessly for days. Sullivan later recalled her gut reaction. The crime scene screamed of panic. A sloppy killer who made mistakes. Photographs were taken, fingerprints were swabbed, and potential DNA evidence was meticulously collected. Among the grim discoveries inside the crawl space were a red and black checkered blanket, pillows, Diet Coke cans, and multiple knives, all bearing traces of the intruder's DNA. The evidence began pointing in a chilling direction. Investigators knew they had the suspect's DNA, but they didn't know his name. Yet. The blood smears, the disorganized violence, and the half-hearted cleanup attempts painted a vivid profile. A rushed, desperate killer, unfamiliar with murder, but capable of extraordinary brutality. 9 agonizing days passed. 1,000 leads trickled in, but led nowhere. Finally, using DNA genealogy and cell phone tower data, police tracked their suspect. On January 3, 2020, over 3 years after the murders, Jonathan Hearst was arrested in Cincinnati, Ohio. He had no prior connection to Patricia or Robert Wilson. He was just passing through. After years of painstaking investigation and delay, Jonathan Hearst finally stood trial for the murders of Patricia and Robert Wilson. The courtroom in DeKalb County was heavy with tension. Rows of grieving family members, friends, and community members filled the benches, many holding hands, many wearing somber expressions. It had been nearly 9 years since that bloody night. The prosecution laid out a harrowing case. They presented the DNA evidence, Hearst's fingerprints and biological traces found on the pillow, Diet Coke cans, and knives inside the Wilsons' crawl space. His cell phone data placed him in Sycamore during the time of the murders. There was no connection between Hearst and the Wilsons, only a brutal, random act of violence. They painted a vivid picture, a drifter hiding in an elderly woman's home, armed with weapons, waiting in the darkness. They argued that when Patricia entered the laundry room, Hearst panicked and killed her, then staged her bedroom to buy time. When Robert came home, Hearst killed again. The defense struggled to counter the DNA evidence. They tried to sow doubt, pointing out that the crime scene was cluttered and that not every item had been swabbed. They admitted Hearst was in the house, but argued that being present didn't prove murder. They raised questions about missing fingerprints on the murder weapon and the chaotic nature of the crime scene. In a last attempt to humanize Hearst, the defense called friends and family to testify to his gentle nature. They described him as a kind man who hosted Thanksgiving dinners for friends with nowhere else to go. They said he was incapable of violence. But to the Wilson family, it didn't matter. The victim impact statements shattered the courtroom's composure. Patricia's loved ones spoke of her kindness, her energy, even at 85 years old, and how Robert's cheerful spirit had been extinguished. Through their tears, they made one thing painfully clear: nothing could bring them back. And as for Hearst's remorse, if it existed at all, it was invisible to those who had lost everything. When the guilty verdict came down, 2 counts of first-degree murder and home invasion, there was no joy, only a quiet, exhausted relief. Justice was served, but the wounds would never fully heal. The courtroom verdict delivered a legal closure, but outside the walls of justice, the aftermath rippled deeper. Patricia and Robert Wilson's murders left scars across Sycamore, scars that no sentence could erase. Residents of the small Illinois town struggled to process how such a random, senseless act could have struck so close to home. Patricia had been the kind face at St. John's Lutheran Church, handing out dollar bills to children every Sunday. Robert had been the smiling, generous fixture at the Moose Lodge, a local man whose kindness was known to all. In a town where doors were often left unlocked and neighbors looked after each other, their brutal deaths shattered the illusion of safety. The case gained wider attention through media coverage and true crime documentaries. It was featured on national news and mentioned in podcasts and forums, with many focusing on the horror of how a quiet farmhouse became the scene of such unimaginable violence. Memorials were held, moments of prayer whispered, candles lit in windows. Yet even as Jonathan Hearst was sentenced to life imprisonment without parole, questions remained in the air. Why this house? Why these 2 innocent people? Why this day? There was no clear motive, no robbery gone wrong, no grudge, only a random act of predatory violence by a man who had been a stranger until that fateful August day. For Patricia and Robert's family, the emotional void remains vast. Birthdays, holidays, quiet mornings, all now reminders of what was taken. Hearst will die behind prison walls. Today, their story is a reminder that evil can strike anywhere, that safety is never guaranteed. But more importantly, it is a reminder of the strength of community, the endurance of love, and the way, even in tragedy, human goodness can refuse to be forgotten. Patricia and Robert's legacy is not the blood left behind, but the love they inspired, and the community that rose to honor them. Their memory endures, their kindness echoes, and for everyone who ever crossed paths with them, Sycamore will never quite be the same. In a world where safety feels like a promise, cases like this remind us it's only ever a fragile illusion. What would you have done if it were your family? What lessons should we all take from Sycamore's tragedy?